If stocks were falling sharply and investors were panicking, it's likely we'd say the market was having a meltdown. But what if the market were behaving in a similarly dramatic fashion, but going up instead of down? In this morning's U.S. Bank Economic 360, U.S. Bank Senior Vice President Mike Denneman is with Business Watch producer Kelly Leon in the studio to talk about why some observers are calling this current market a melt up.
Thanks, Peg. Okay, this sounds like a made-up term, melt up.
Right, so exactly. It's not a term that probably most are familiar with, although we're seeing it in the media more and more lately.
Okay.
It's probably a good idea to maybe contrast it to a meltdown, as Peg said, because that's something that we're more familiar with. Think financial crisis or tech bubble popping, right? And so in the meltdown, investors become nervous, they start to sell. As more selling happens, that turns into fear, and it just kind of feeds on itself to where it becomes almost a panic and the market just falls off a cliff, right? Important to remember that it's not really rational selling. People are doing things on emotion rather than on logic, and things sort of spiral downward until you reach a point where there's this realization, hey, this is an overreaction. Things aren't really this bad, and that's when the meltdown starts to cease. So think about all of that in reverse, and that would be the melt up.
Okay, so in reverse, but in a positive direction, so it must be a good thing.
Well, sure. So just as the fear can drive the selling down,
right?
The euphoria or the enthusiasm can drive the buying on the upward side. So think that investors aren't panicking, but perhaps they're a little bit too enthusiastic. And so why would that happen? We hear every day, the market's at a record high. But what if you're not in stocks? You might feel this pressure, I've got to get in, I'm getting left behind. And so the market's high, but you're buying in anyway, or all your buddies, they're riding this hot stock and you don't own it.
Yeah.
You know it's sky high, but I've got to get in on that. And so again, it's not necessarily rational. Instead of fear, maybe it's more on the greed side and you're rushing to catch up instead of trying to not get left behind. So important to remember though that just as investors kind of come to their senses when things are melting down, it happens on the melt up as well when you realize, hey, maybe this is an overreaction, but on a positive note.
So looking at the current market, are you confident to say that we are in a melt up?
Unfortunately, you can't really say one way or the other. There's no real definition of what exactly is a melt up. There's no statistic or equation we can look at. It's more an eye test. Hey, does this look like a melt up? And so it's becoming something you hear more and more about these days because we just came off in October where we had a 5% month. That's a good year in a month, tacked on to what we already had a 20% run up over the past year. So some observers will look at that and say, hey, we had this great run, and then even more on top of that, come on. And so that's where that concept of the melt up starts to come into play. Maybe, maybe not. We won't know until it's over. But with the market setting all these record highs, it's good to keep it in the back of your mind.
Well, it sounds good, and I'm going to hope for the best with the melt up.
Right.
Yeah, and go Bengals, like that tie.
Hoo-day.
Hoo-day. All right.